Hey, everybody. Welcome to In the Know with Nina. I'm your host, Dr. Nina Crowley. I'm the Director of Clinical Education and Partnerships at seca, where we partner with healthcare professionals and clinicians to offer body composition solutions. And today I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Molly Lupo. She's the Lupo Preventive Medicine and private practice owner in Omaha, Nebraska. She's also a podcast host, the More Than Weight Loss podcast with Dr. Molly Lupo. And I recently joined her on her podcast. We got to talking about all the things and wanted to keep the conversation going. So thanks for joining us today.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to continue the conversation.
Yeah, I think one of the things that was very exciting to me is that you have our body composition device. You use it. You've got some cute pictures on your website with it, and yes. I know we've been in touch a lot about questions about how to interpret the results with your patients and clients, and so I think it's a very very important conversation that we can have. And I'd like to sort of start in your area of practice with women. One of the things that I focus a lot on for me as a dietitian and psychologist is about the long history our patients have with dieting and shame around the scale. So I think sort of transitioning into a more body composition mindset is a really interesting practice. And I know that's a huge passion of yours. So I'd love to have you talk some about that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Now you are speaking to my entire practice right now, which, it's just, I think it's so hard for women where everything has been so appearance-based focused, so scale-based focused our entire lives. And when they start to shift and start to think about body composition over just the daily weight on the scale, like it doesn't tell them anything about like what's actually going on inside metabolically, like how they actually feel, all of that. And so, yes, like people want weight loss and people want that piece, but it's like, we're no longer chasing the high school weight. If we're chasing body composition, then we are adding things. We're adding strength training. We're adding enough like nutrient dense foods and quality and consistent. And I just want to like get away from the like massive like restriction that women have had to go through for the past bajillion years. And I want them to be able to focus on something that is sort of within their control, which is they can, and they, sort of have autonomy over their body composition to a degree.
I love that. Yeah. The relationships people have with the number on the scale are so deep and so hard to get away from. I think, we were talking on your podcast about, even patients who really get it. They get all of the muscle health. They get the exercise. They get all of that. They still get on that scale and see that number and have a reaction, visceral reaction, whether it's positive for seeing a low number or, of course, disappointed and all of that. And it's such a shame because there's so much more, that they are outside of that weight on the scale. And you can do all the counseling in the world and then have that dumb number come up and kind of ruin it.
And that number can dictate how their day goes. It dictates if they spend the day like feeling bad about themselves. It dictates what they're choosing to eat that day. It can really affect them in a negative way. And I will never forget a therapist said to me once, she said something along the lines of like, why would someone need to weigh themselves every day in order to know if they are choosing sort of like healthy habits or like taking care of themselves in a nourishing way? Because right now, I just still see this all the time as like women are just using the scale for either yippee, like I've got this new low number and I'm going to keep going. And then like they're on cloud 9. And then when it fluctuates or when it trends upwards, like then like it's like shame and disappointment and feeling horrible about themselves. And then that can send them into its own spiral of like not eating well for the day or whatever, or restricting more. Like it's so complicated and nuanced for women for how we've grown up and how society looks at us. And I am just like so happy that we're finally finding something else that we can focus on besides the number on the scale.
And I think too, it's, for those of us who are, middle aged, there's lots and lots of years. I think we have more hope for the younger generation who maybe grows up with
Yeah.
this mindset and never having that other stuff to undo. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, those numbers. I also think it's interesting. I think you have a good amount of patients who are taking medication
Mm-hmm.
for obesity management. Um, you know, where people get it when they say it's more than just the number when they're not doing well or not seeing changes that they want to see in that number. But then they lose weight, and then they're kind of back to using that for validation.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
for the first time, maybe the weight is coming off of them in a proportional amount to their effort, right?
Yeah.
They've always worked hard, but now they're actually seeing some, change in their body size or their weight. They're back to sort of over focusing on that. And that's such a
Mm-hmm.
shame too.
Yeah, I agree. And I always think about, because when I first started my private practice, I would ask people, what's like your ideal body weight range? And then I stopped asking that question because the answer was always like, well in high school or when I was in my 20s, I weighed this. And it's not to say that maybe some people don't get back to somewhere near there, but I find that when you shift the focus from this like high school skinny piece of you to this, like, how can I be strong? How can I be empowered? The body composition piece of it is very powerful and empowering to them. And you feel stronger and you feel more empowered. And I just always think about weight loss and weight management as sort of in the background of what we're doing to take care of ourselves on the day in and day out.
So how do you get them to focus on, the body comp more than weight?
I feel like it's not just like, okay, and here's a body composition lesson. And now this is the only thing that we're going to care about and look at, I sort like, I always think of like weight management and everything as like, this is a daily, like likely a daily practice for the rest of your life. If for someone who has struggled with weight and people who haven't struggled with weight, I'm just like not terribly interested in hearing their side of it because they don't know the struggle that women have gone through who have struggled with weight. And so it comes back to this daily practice. And what I think about is, how do you actually feel? Like energetically, how do you feel showing up at the gym? How do you feel in your body? Like, how are those metrics coming out? And how are you feeding yourself? How are you nourishing yourself? How are you taking care of yourself in a way that is not from a place of like this self-hate or shame, but like just a place of this self-love? And how can you find the joy in the movement? How can you find joy in how you actually feed yourself? How can you find those things? And in the background, while you're doing those things, can the weight loss be happening? Whether it's using weight management medications, whether it's working on that with lifestyle and nutrition, like it's just so much more nuanced than calories in and calories out for women.
I can imagine too, though, that was my sort of philosophy when I was in practice as a dietitian. It was kind of earth shattering for people who've spent a long time expecting external guidance and outsiders to tell them what to do, right? Where you're like asking them kind of uncomfortable questions of, how does this make you feel? Or how do what
Yeah.
foods give you energy, or all of that. And it can be a big change to get away from that, because that's like been their world or their crutch even for such a long time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's like everyone wants the plan. What should I eat? How should I move? And it's like, yeah, we have guidelines, we have parameters for this. But what actually makes you feel good? What foods do you notice like make you overeat? What foods do you feel like really satisfy you? What forms of movement do you actually enjoy? Because I had a woman a few weeks ago asked me like, well, should I move my strength training from 3 days a week to 4 days a week? And I was like, do you want to do that? Like, is this going to help you adhere to some sort of movement plan for the long term? Because if moving it from 3 to 4 times a week means that you're cutting out, I don't know, a biking session, a swimming session,
Yes.
something that you enjoy, I don't know that that's the answer. Like, I want you to feel and have sort of these plans in place or these structures in place that you actually like, that you actually enjoy, that doesn't feel like a death sentence of salad and grilled chicken every night.
But there's so, I mean, that over reliance on the outside external motivation, and that like they don't trust themselves after
Yeah.
so many times of like trying and failing, or in their feeling, not experiencing weight loss success after trying something. It's like that cycle of they don't trust themselves anymore, so then whatever they think they like or want to do is bad or wrong, and some sort of black and white thinking
Yeah.
mentality, right? And then they're looking to you for a list or a plan, right? And I used to, I mean, I loved patients coming in and asking that, because I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, I'll give you the plan. It has tofu on it. It has this or that. I'm
Yeah.
like, oh no, I wouldn't eat that. I'm like, I know. So like, why do you want my plan? That
Yeah.
works for me, but how about we find something that actually works for you that you can do long term? And I think all of your language suggests that we're very much aligned in that philosophy. And I love to see that, because you might be the first person that a patient lands with that has that approach.
Yeah. And it's like they like that mistrust with themselves is deep, because how many diets and how many programs and how many meal replacement whatever have they tried, and then when they stop, the weight comes back or whatever. And the piece that dang it, I just lost my train of thought. But what
The
was I going to
deep
say
mistrust.
there? Hmm. It was something about that level of mistrust is so deep within them that I find actually that's where the weight management medications can be so helpful, because no one has ever explained to them, like, this is not all you. This is your hunger hormones. This is your satiety hormones. This is your body and brain literally trying to protect you from, being in a deficit or whatever. The body and brain don't want, and they don't like you to lose weight, and it is their way to like fight back for you to maintain current weight or even go higher than a set point. And I just feel like no one is talking about that. I mean, obviously people are talking about that in the obesity medicine world, but in your local mom groups, nobody has that sort of sense to it. And so it's always still about willpower and doing this and doing that. And it's like, it's so much deeper than that, in that the way that hunger feels for one person could be completely different for another person. And this is just where I get like I get like agitated when I see these like influencers on Instagram or whatever being like, oh, well, you shouldn't do Ozempic because it's just a short-term solution. And it's like, you have no idea the deeper pieces of the biology that are at play for maybe her, and for how hard this is for her, and how it feels in her body could be vastly different from the way it feels in someone's body who's never struggled with weight.
Right. It's definitely one of those, you've got to walk through it to understand it, almost like pregnancy a little bit.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I did most of my clinical work with bariatric surgery, and I remember when I got pregnant and had a baby, I actually really understood the surgical patient experience at a whole new level of like, oh, random people coming up and making comments, telling you about your
Yeah.
future experience, telling you what to eat, telling you, making assumptions. And it was like, that is what's happening to our patients every day, their whole life. And that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot with medication and with this sort of new interest from the masses in this area that is complex. And I think in the very early phase that we're still in, people are experiencing some, nice results. And, there's a lot of try this and then get off of it. Right. So
Oh, yes.
I know, from being in this field for almost 20 years, like it's a long-term thing. It's
Yeah.
your relationship with food and eating and your body and your brain and all of these things for life. So I am excited that we have options for people now. I think it's really exciting that there's, a way to help the biology piece. And then I think all of
Yes.
that other work, there's public perception that they don't have to do anything because the medication is
Right.
doing it. But anyone who's, on these long term or who's struggled with their weight long term knows that it all works together, right?
Yeah.
If you can have some help biologically, fantastic. That makes it easier to do the things that they know what to do. I mean,
Yeah.
I was every day I had a in my face experience of a patient who knew more than I did about nutrition and
Oh,
eating, and
sure.
of course on their own of themselves, of like, they don't have an education deficit. They just have,
Right.
biology getting in the way. And so that is like a really beautiful thing that I think a lot of people can experience now.
Yeah, I will never forget because when I very first started my practice, I was like, everyone should just do nutrition and lifestyle, and this is how it should be. And like that, I mean, it like lasted for, I don't know, maybe a year. And, I was like losing patients to follow up. And I remember someone asked me if I would prescribe them phentermine. And I was just like, I was so deep into, the lifestyle medicine curriculum
Mm,
that I was like, no, because once you come off of it, you're gonna gain the weight back.
mm,
And then finally I was like, I'm gonna learn about these medications. And so I learned about them and I was like, I'm just gonna try them out for some patients. And if it works, great. And if it doesn't seem to be a fit, then I don't have to do this forever. And so I started doing the, OMA's trainings and all that. And I will just never forget. I think she was like mid 40s woman who had tried all the nutrition and lifestyle things. And she happened to have coverage for Wegovy. And so we started her on it. And a month later, she came back and she was like, is this how normal people feel?
mm,
And I was like, tell me more. And she said, look, I used to get so hungry that I would undo everything by 9 or 10 p.m. at night because I couldn't sleep because I was so hungry. And then because I wasn't sleeping, I wasn't waking up early to go to the gym like I wanted to because I wasn't
mm,
getting good sleep. And it was just this vicious cycle for her. And she said, I finally, like, my hunger is finally tamed, or, it felt so much better to her and her body. And she said, so now I can finally sleep. And because I'm finally sleeping, I'm
mm,
getting up early to go to the gym. And she came back just like, is this? And then I think it was also around the holidays. And she was like, I went to my company party and I had one, I don't know, dessert thing. And usually I would not be able to just have one and move on. And I had one and and that was fine, and she was just so excited about how she felt and how it just didn't feel like a struggle anymore.
mm. I'm just thinking the opposite of that downward spiral, right? So like an experience like that,
Yes,
building her confidence, then she can
for
go into the
sure.
next thing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I love that. So tell me a little bit. I know you focus a good bit on exercise and movement in your practice, and I follow you on Instagram, so I see your own stuff. But what's your
Yeah.
approach to helping patients, build or preserve muscle, and through all of the fun parts of the menopause and transition, and
Yeah.
all of these fun parts of their
Yeah. I mean, I'm an aging woman as well. And we've had 4 kids, and after the last few, it's just not been as easy as it was with the other two to lose the weight or whatever. And the more I learned through OMA, the more it sort of like fueled my fire to like sort of be an example to those around me. And besides the weight loss, it's like you have better insulin sensitivity, you have better blood sugar regulation, you feel better, you feel stronger, you're preserving your bone health as you age. Like, these things are so much more important to me because I'm like, I want to be around when I have grandkids or whatever, and I don't want to be like a frail 80-year-old. I want to be like the one who's like still hanging on the pull-up bar. So, you know, for me, it's always sort of a question of asking women in my practice, like, where are you at with activity, and like how interested or how motivated are you to, start a strength training program or start some sort of movement program, 0 to 10. And I mean, it all goes back to sort of the motivational interviewing piece of it. And I at times wish I was like better at this piece, because it's hard to get women into the gym. It's hard to get them in, you know, I I hear it all the time. It's like, well, I went, but I felt like I was the new kid there. Or I went and it's like all of these men are in the weightlifting section. I have no idea what to do. And I really try to let that not be the barrier that stops them. Like, yes, of course that feels intimidating. And so validating them and, making sure that they feel heard, or they're, because it is intimidating and you don't always feel like you can go up and use the bench or the bar or whatever. But what I will say to them is like, what would make you comfortable? Is it having a few sessions with a trainer where they walk you through the moves? I also really like to utilize the local physical therapist. Like, would you like to go see one of the physical therapists and they can show you some of the basic moves and right programming? Would you feel better in sort of a women's only strength training and conditioning gym? Those like boutique gyms are popping up more. But like, what does that look like for you? What would make you comfortable? Because ultimately, once I can get them comfortable in there, then they're going to build that self-efficacy. They're going to build sort of like that strong feeling that they get from doing it. They're going to build the self-belief and just the empowerment that comes from lifting the heavier weights and doing the thing. And it doesn't all have to be strength and conditioning. Like, they can add movement that they really enjoy and love as well.
That's awesome. I mean, I just love the patient-centered motivational interviewing approach too. And it just flowing very easily. So I know that you're, like that with your patients and very comfortable doing that. That makes a difference. The language of people who are just giving advice and telling people what to do, that has a vibe, and that, it shuts down conversations like, well, you should be doing this. And, are you doing this? And those types of questions, kind of end those conversations, because
for sure,
I always compare it to like dental appointments where you go and like, are you flossing? Oh, not as much as I should. Right. Like, that's such a black and white, simple behavior. And yet still, we don't all do it as much as we should. And there's so many words like should, and, all of those directive sort of, language around that. And so I think it's a nice approach, especially with exercise, because there's not always an exercise person on your team. But figuring out where they're comfortable and then getting them connected with somebody, that's huge. That's the difference between a try it for a minute versus a lifelong, mover.
Yeah, for sure. And another question I will ask folks sometimes is there a time in your life where you were super consistent with exercise? And what did that look like? And, oftentimes people can find something in the past and of course they will say like, oh yeah, I felt really good when I was showing up to the group class or whatever. I also just think there's so much power in the group class, because you get the accountability of it. You start making friends around you. This is so funny that you bring this up. I was having a conversation with my women in my coaching group, and one of them is like struggling to get to the gym and like figure out like what it looks like for her and all of these things. And I said, you know what gyms should do? Gyms should have like a liaison. So you're going to have to sign up for the class at some point. Or you're going to have to like go and do the thing. And once you make that first contact, because it's not like you're walking in and making the sign up, you're usually like sending them a message or emailing them. And I said, as soon as they see a woman who signs up, who's interested in strength training, they should have like a buddy system where they have someone reach out to be like, hey, I'm going to be at this class when you're going to go. I'm going to have your back, because otherwise I do think it's so intimidating to walk into a group fitness class or just the gym in general and be like, I'm new here and I don't fit in, even though no one else is thinking that about you. That's what you're thinking about yourself.
I love that. It's also just very personal, right? So I for me, it's always logistics. It's
Yeah.
where do I drive? Like I had a whole thing with
Yes.
my high school girlfriends were laughing at me so much because I'm like, what happened to the towels at the gym? Like that is a deal breaker. And I used to go to one that was at my medical university hospital. Like they had towels. They don't have towels anymore. I have to shower there and I need
Yeah.
not to be annoying. And all of the logistics of that make the difference of if this is an easy thing to incorporate into my day.
Totally.
And I think being able to talk through those and even the stuff that we think is stupid like that, that can be a deal breaker. And
Oh,
so helping
yes.
people figure that out, I think is also part of that bigger
Yeah.
conversation.
No, it's like the little things that matter. And at my local Y, I like always want to shower there, but I have to like bring all of the things and then I have to like pack them up from home to bring them back, and I've thought about like, do I just get double of everything so then I don't have to pack and unpack? But you're right. It's like it is the logistics of thinking through the whole experience. And then like if you
Yeah.
have kids or activities,
The
like you have
drive.
to have it timed in there, like
Yeah.
just right.
Yeah. Do I want to spend 15 minutes in the car here or
Yeah.
here? Or do I just do the video at home? I mean,
Yeah.
truly,
Yeah.
these are the things that are
Yeah.
make or break the
Yeah.
exercise routine. Yeah. Well, so then how do you, your patients are all in person or virtual or what's your model? A little bit of both?
Yep. So for a new patient visit, they have to come face to face. We usually do that one. And then it's up to them if they want to do telehealth or come back in. But I obviously like the body composition scale. So I recommend to them, every 3 months or so, but not everybody, wants to do it or whatever. But that's sort of like what I recommend.
Okay. So you give them a choice and they have availability in your office.
Yeah.
Cool. And so when you, I know we talked about this offline, but when you are talking to your patients about their body comp, which parameters do you review with them? I know hopefully you're not doing all 19 at once because that's so
Oh
much
my gosh.
information, but
That is so funny because when I think Seca or you maybe had sent an email and it only had like the first 4. And I was like, how do I change it to this? Because I would just hit all analysis parameters after they were done getting their scan and I would print them and I would sort of like go through,
oh
like
no.
the body fat percentage. I like the little graph of like where your muscle is, the lean mass, the fat, or I guess the fat free mass is that, and then and then I would be like, some of these I don't know as in depth, but I would always print out the boxes that has all the descriptions next to it. But I
And then
mean,
you stopped and it straightened you out, right?
once you showed me how I can filter, now I give them, what are those top 4? It's like their body fat percentage,
Visceral adipose tissue. Do you use that
visceral adipose tissue, the fat mass index. I do like the skeletal muscle index. And then once we get further down there, that's where I need Nina to come and help me.
one? Okay. What do they respond to the most? Like what, from their perspective, what are they like? Oh, I love seeing this data.
I mean, people love to see their body fat percentage decrease. Seeing stuff in the red, no one ever likes to see stuff in the red. And it's like such a balance, because it's like, I'm not like here to like judge by any means. And this is sort of a baseline. We're just, starting here. And then we can check in on this as you go. And then that's also where I sort of try to plug strength training and working with a dietitian and all of that. And honestly, even a therapist, because a lot of this stuff is, again, so deep and so nuanced, and they need more than just calories in and calories out. People do like the energy expenditure, framework. I find that sometimes that is helpful. Sometimes it's, a lot of people are always like, I could never eat that much,
Right.
and it's like, well, the only real way to know is to test it. But yeah.
So I know maybe the last time we spoke, we talked a little bit about the treatment tracker, but one of the things I love about that is so the treatment trackers are new software that you're able to look at change in over time in metrics like weight, fat mass, fat-free mass, and muscle mass. But you're also able to add on the bottom the treatments that they're on. So this is where you can then in one graph see like, okay, this is somebody on this medication or doing this lifestyle intervention, and here's what's happening to body comp. I love it for a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones is that when you're talking to patients with obesity, of course they're in the red for many of these things, right? We know that their body weight is over the threshold. That's why they're there for treatment. We know that their body fat percentage most likely is also up. And for many, their fat-free mass or their muscle mass might also be, high, and that's a good thing usually.
Sure.
So we know that, but what I like about the treatment tracker is when you sort of switch over to that view, you're starting to track just that person's data and not where they're at in comparison to the reference group anymore. So I like that because that's like reminding them this is your journey and we're looking for change in your metrics. So we don't need to be, overly focused on where you're at compared to other people or in the red or green. The colors can help and also, be confusing to some. So I like it for that. So, kind of after that first visit, you could switch over to looking at the data points in that way and really even staying there for a while until, there's some reason to kind of switch back to let's look at it in this other view.
Yeah. I definitely, I also, I need to use that treatment tracker more.
And it shows them sort of the like longevity of time. To me, I think of everything in a graph, right? So I'm like always we're on that x-axis moving along in time. This does show you that like maybe, and if you don't want to look at weight, we did make it intentionally. You could look at weight or you could look at the body comp parameters. So if we want to get away from that weight conversation, you just don't use that screen. But like we're looking at maybe just staying straight across in muscle mass is a giant win, right? So we sometimes have to reframe our brain's like tendency to want to see drastic, sharp, declines or inclines in metrics. And I always use this image of like reality versus like what we think is going to happen and what's actually happening. Here's that straight line and here's life and that bumpy, fuzzy line, because that's what happens with weight. That's what happens with body composition. And, even though we want to think, it's going to be one way or another, I think it's really useful to sort of reframe people's expectations and show them this is what happens. And this is how it's, supposed to happen. And it's okay. You can also hide measurements from like the middle. So if you've got somebody, I used to always talk to people before they had surgery, what are some things that they wish they could do that they never could do before and all of that. And I'd show them, somehow it would always come back to weight, but I'd show them sort of here's where you're at to start and here's where you're at now, all the different things you can do. But with weight and these other metrics, you can show like here's where you're at a year ago and now without the noise. If you hide the noise, you can see that straight line and say, if we were actually able to be objective thinkers and see from here to here, this is how you've done and how you've changed, maybe that's enough to sort of remind or show them like you have made intense progress in this direction, whatever that is.
Yeah, that is a fun feature too of hiding the data, because you can really highlight like what has happened, especially if you have like a year's worth of data like you're talking about. You can really show like this is the lean mass that you've been able to preserve, and this is the body fat percentage that you've been able to lose or whatever. And that feature is nice too.
And some people I think need, there's a lot of times people are like, well, if everyone needs to just, lose fat and increase muscle, why do we need to show them that? And it's, unfortunately or fortunately, the way our, brains and behavior works is sometimes we need to see it for ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
And so, there's, I think it's a motivator for a lot of people when they see their own data to say, oh, okay, yes, you have been saying, how can I get into strength training? And, I have been resistant to that, but wow, seeing my numbers there in the red
Yeah.
or in the low or whatever you want to say, all right, now I'm a little more open to that.
Yeah. No, I think for sure that, and I think about that too, of like, just like how sometimes people will say like, well, for baseline labs, I only get a CBC, a BMP, and lipids, a thyroid, and that's where I start. And then you'll have other people who say, yep, and I add on a fasting insulin, and I add on vitamin D and B12, and I've heard both sides of this where it's like, well, it doesn't really change my treatment plan um, if I get these and they are elevated. But I heard a physician say this once, and it was it might not change your treatment plan, but it might be motivating for that patient to change behavior, to change lifestyle, to change whatever, to improve that number. And I always thought that was like so helpful because I think it's true. When I can show someone, you know, their insulin resistance, or if I can show someone that their fasting blood sugar is elevated and they have a family history of type 2 diabetes and it runs deep, they are going to be motivated to change the things,
Mm-hmm.
And I find the same thing here of like, if I see that my skeletal muscle mass is really low, or if my body fat percentage isn't quite where I want it to be, some people thrive on data and other people it's too much. And so you do have to sort of like, just again, meet them where they're at and what they want to know. And, just sort of assessing how motivated are you to change this right now? And it might not be right now. It might be in 6 months. It might be, and so that's the piece of just working with them and just being honestly also being a place for them to land. Right. So even when the BMI is high or the body fat percentage is higher than they want it, being a safe space for them to land and to not shame them and to just have them like let them talk, I think that means so much to them.
Yeah. Well, I do like that approach or that quote from whoever gave you that also,
Yeah, I don't
because
remember who it was. I was like watching a training one time and he said that.
that approach of that doesn't change my treatment plan for them is sort of the definition of non-patient centered care, right? Like
Yeah.
assuming that you make the rules, tell them what to do when they go home and either do it or they don't do it.
Yeah.
But if you're actually talking about how does the patient respond to that data, that other part is irrelevant. It's what matters to them. And you can either ask that or you can show that and you can have those conversations. So I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to end with maybe one of the patients that you were telling me you had, you were sort of excited that you had body comp data on, because had you looked at them or used weight alone, you would have had one sort of view of their health. But once you looked at their body comp data, you had some different thoughts.
Sure. So I have two different women. One that has like primarily just worked nutrition and lifestyle, and one that has used weight management medication. So this first one used nutrition, lifestyle, strength training, protein, making sure we're getting quality nutrition, sleep, all of the things that we talk about. And when I look at her trend, so she lost 2.9 from her BMI. Her fat mass index, she lost 2.5 kgs. Her fat-free mass index, she only lost 0.4. Her fat mass percentage, she lost 4.1%, which I was like, holy cow. Her skeletal muscle mass, she lost 1.9 pounds. And then her waist circumference, she lost 4 inches.
Wow.
So that was like such a fun, obviously, body composition to trend and look at. She started in January. She redid it in April. This is maybe a question for you, actually. So in weight loss, everyone always uses the magical 0.5 to 2 pounds per week for weight loss as like, that's where you preserve lean mass and you're not, going to sort of ricochet back. But what is the fat mass percentage that you want to aim to lose over time?
I don't think there is one. I think it's
Interesting.
so, I don't think it's consistent. It's also, tricky as you're getting people up to, what dosage works for them. I think that's an interesting part of medication management these days where, the messaging to the masses is, wow, you get on a medication and the weight's melting off of you, right? And so
Yeah.
that's this expectation. But I've seen, and I don't do clinical practice anymore, but I've seen enough people that I've talked to, some are responding intensely at the lowest dose of a medication, and others are, 4
Yeah.
months into, ramping up to the highest dose of
Yeah.
Zepbound before they're even seeing any change in,
Yeah.
they may see change in their feeling and their appetite and their food noise, but they're not seeing any change in weight or their body comp yet. And so I almost think, I mean, to me, those numbers and averages probably are more harmful than helpful, because then that gets an idea in your head of what should be. And when you're
Hmm.
not at what you should
Yeah.
be, you feel lesser than. And
Yeah.
so to me, as much as I can steer away from numbers based expectations for what your body's going to respond to something we don't
Sure.
really know, I think it's important to just be there to, I always view it like it's an experiment, like how is this going to react? How are you going to respond to either, whatever the treatment may be? Because regardless of where they're at, the conversation is either a praise based pat on the
Yeah.
back of you did good or better than expected, or
Hmm.
a sort of shame based, ooh, what's wrong with you that you didn't get there?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
But I haven't heard any guidelines, otherwise from how much or how fast.
Yeah.
Um, or really, if I think still the unknown question in all of this is if some loss of fat-free mass, or more detailed, of skeletal muscle mass, um, if some loss of that really is as detrimental as, we don't really know how much
Yeah.
is too much, because a lot of that matters on where they start.
Yeah.
If you've got someone who's starting, if you're picturing that body composition chart, low muscle, high fat, you might want to go slower to get them up to dosage and monitor their metrics a little closer. But if you've got
Yeah.
someone who's got both very high fat free mass, very high muscle, but also very high fat, they do have maybe a little more, um,
Reserve.
wiggle room or reserve to lose that without worrying or freaking out.
Sure.
So I think that is what's really cool about this, is you get to personalize it, and that is why you get the data on them before you start
Yeah.
midpoints, monthly,
Yeah, for
however
sure.
often you're doing it.
For sure. And then my other case is a 38-year-old woman who, I don't think I had the seca when she started Zepbound, so I don't have a baseline for her. But this is my plea, and um, this is what I try to tell women without like fear mongering. I'd never want to be a fear monger, but like, she came in, she has been on Zepbound for quite some time, and her BMI, while it's in a normal range now, her skeletal muscle mass is really low. And her body fat percentage is much higher than like what I would think it to be. And again, I'm like, how do I talk about this without scaring people, but
Mm,
also with like, we want to do both simultaneously. But it just goes back to the scale's not the only metric of measurement
mm.
here.
The other part of that I think is very interesting, I can sort of picture what her result sheet looks like, is
Mm-hmm.
that back to our math and our calculations, right? So when we think of, we talk about skeletal muscle mass as a absolute number in pounds generally,
Mm-hmm.
but we talk about body fat often as a percentage. And so if you were to look at her body fat mass in pounds, that's one number, but the percentage just means you're dividing it over her total weight, right? So if someone's
Mm-hmm.
losing weight, they're losing it from fat, their top number, their numerator is going down, the fat mass, but their denominator is going down too. So if they're losing kind of even at an equal rate, the ratio or the percentage may even stay the same. So it's another sort of maybe plug for looking at more than one data point from
For
your
sure.
analysis to say, hey, the body fat percentage for her, high body fat percentage is because she's got, of the weight she's carrying, such low muscle that the rest of
Mm-hmm.
it is fat. And so is she under muscled or is she over, fat or adipose tissue? Maybe both.
Sure. And it's like, which one,
Yeah.
comes first, or which one do you work on first? But yeah,
So in her,
that's,
I would almost even grab the numbers out of the report and look at change in fat mass total in pounds, how that's changed along with her weight change over that same period. We don't have that as a particular
yeah.
graph or metric. Maybe that's something we need to, think about. But I do
Yeah.
think those numbers, and sometimes crunching those numbers, I actually find sometimes crunching the numbers with the patient can be helpful because you're doing that
Sure.
together, like reminding them this is math. We are having to sort of do this together. Whereas if it's just showing them, a shiny graph, they might not get the whole background
Yeah.
behind that.
Yeah. Yeah. Super interesting.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think, looking at the individual case is um, always puts sort of a face to what we're talking about. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
Well, listen, I think you and I could talk for far
We
longer than we
could.
have the attention of our listeners. So I want to, maybe wrap up and let everybody know how to follow and stay in touch with you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at Dr. Molly Lupo, DrMollylYLupo. I've got a weekly free newsletter I send out every week. If you hit me up on Instagram, I'm happy to get you that. And yeah, that's where I'm most active. And then, of course, if you are local to Omaha or in Nebraska, want to come see me, happy to see you in private practice too.
Great. And follow your podcast.
Oh, yes. And my podcast, the More Than Weight Loss podcast with Dr. Molly Lupo. And I try to put one out every week.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. And
Yes. Thank
hope
you
to
for
see
having me.
you at one of our next meetings coming up.
Yes.
Thank you.